Is in public session and will be recorded and broadcast subsequently. At this stage, members, apologies from Kate and Nicole. I have no others. Any member have any declarations of interest they wish to raise? If none, item 3.1, chairperson's business miscarriage leave. The department previously advised that it was to bring a paper to the executive in respect of delegated legislation which would provide for paid parental bereavement leave, which was be extended to include miscarriage leave. Is the committee content that we seek an update on the rollout of that? Yeah. Great. Draft minutes, members, are at page 7, where they'll find a copy of our draft minutes from the 26th of March. Are members content that they are a true and accurate reflection? Agreed. Matters arising then, members, at page 5. Is there any issue members wish to raise at this stage? Hello, sir.
We went to the email that said the outlet.
Parking right? Did you get a bus to yourself? Did you get a bus to yourself?
We drove.
Very good. Okay, item 6 then, members. Offshore Renewable Energy Action Plan consultation. The committee will now hear from the department on the ongoing consultation on aspects of the Offshore Renewable Energy Action Plan. The clerk's covering note is at page 18. Colleagues from the department, you are all very welcome. Jamie Graham, Director, Business, Gas, Minerals and Renewable Energy. Michael, Megan, Offshore Renewable Electricity Team, and Jordan, Todd. Colleagues, you're all very welcome, and I'll hand over to you at this stage.
Chair, members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for the chance to come and speak to you about the consultation on the environmental reports for offshore renewable energy in our marine area. My name is Jimmy Graham. I'm a director in the department's energy group, and with me are Michael Mageean and Jordan Todd, who work on offshore renewable electricity policy. So I'll start by giving a brief background to the department's offshore action plan, which sets out the context for the current public consultation, and then I'll outline the next steps following its conclusion. So as you know, the Department for the Economy is responsible for the delivery of the Executive's energy strategy. The strategy brought a renewed focus on the need to diversify our electricity generation mix, including offshore renewable energy. So we need offshore renewable energy to decarbonise our electricity production, but it could also be transformational to our economy. And the race is on around the globe to establish new supply chains to support the offshore wind industry, and we have an opportunity to be part of that. So DFE, in collaboration with other departments and key stakeholders, have developed an offshore renewable energy action plan known as the OREAP, put in place the necessary policy and processes to enable offshore development in our marine area from 2030. The OREAP is a living document, and the action plan will be updated as policy development progresses and new evidence becomes available. So since its inception, the OREAP has delivered a statement of intent with the Crown Estate, public consultations on the draft action plan, policy options for offshore renewable energy installations, and the permanent secretaries of DFI, DERA and DFE will hopefully shortly sign a cross-departmental MOU which outlines commitments to work in collaboration on offshore renewable energy applications. And then of course we're here to talk about the environmental reports today. So our legislation sets out a procedure that must be undertaken by statutory bodies to identify and assess the environmental impact their plans and programmes are likely to have on the environment before they're adopted. And as the OREAP is a plan to enable the ambition for offshore renewable energy to be taken forward, it's necessary to assess the environmental impact of that plan before it can be formally adopted. So DFE appointed RPS Ireland to undertake an update to the Strategic Environmental Assessment, SEA, and Habitats Regulation Assessment, HRA, of offshore renewable energy in our marine area. So we've engaged with key stakeholders in the preparation of the environmental assessments, which includes DERA, the Crown Estate, the OREAP Steering Group, the Offshore Renewable Energy Forum, the Ministry of Defence, and also industry representatives. So the Department is now consulting on environmental reports which will be used to inform the OREAP, and a public consultation on this topic was launched in late February and will remain open until the 22nd of May. A number of supplementary documents were published alongside the public consultation, so I'll briefly explain those. The SEA environmental report, and the purpose of that report is to provide an assessment of the likely significant effects on the environment arising from the implementation of the OREAP. Through a 3-stage iterative process, the assessment has identified potential resource zones which may be suitable for offshore renewable energy development. So stage 1, technically suitable resource zones. So the first stage of that assessment involved the identification of areas that are suitable for the development and operation of various offshore renewable energy technology types: fixed wind, floating wind, tidal and wave. No locations were identified for commercial scale wave energy extraction within our marine area, and as a result, wave energy has been screened out of the assessments. Stage 2 is recommended resource zones, and at the second stage in the assessment, key environmental sensitivities and constraints were identified within each resource zone for each SEA topic. The areas were then refined to avoid areas identified as having the highest environmental or technical constraint. And where an area was considered to be too highly constrained at this stage of the assessment, it was screened out. And in fact, there was 3 fixed wind locations screened out at this point. And then stage 3 is the refined resource zones. And that third stage of the assessment attempts to avoid or minimise any significant adverse effects on wider environmental constraints and sensitivities within the assessments. And these areas are known as environmentally aspirational and will be key consideration when examining the options for offshore renewable energy at the next stage of the refinement process. So the next report is the report to inform appropriate assessment, or the RIAA, and that's a habitats regulations assessment of the impact of the OREAP against the conservation objectives of a European site. It consists of a stage approach, with each stage determining if a further stage in the process is required. So stage 1 was where screening was undertaken to ascertain whether the OREAP is directly connected with or necessary to the management of any European site, and if this is not the case, whether it's likely to have a significant effect on any European site. And the conclusion that the possibility of likely significant effects could not be excluded at this stage. So we moved on to stage 2, and that appropriate assessment considers the impact of the plan on the integrity of identified European sites with respect to conservation objectives and the structure and function of those sites. The RIAA has been prepared and provides a transparent assessment of the OREAP and examines the likely significant effects of the plan and the potential for adverse effects on site integrity of those European sites. And the RIAA will inform the conclusions of the appropriate assessment to be undertaken by the department. And then finally, we've published an updated version of the OREAP with this consultation, and appended to that is the government response to the original draft plan. So this consultation is the first step towards identifying the areas for potential development for offshore renewable energy, and to provide stakeholders with an opportunity to provide their views to us on what could potentially be the largest energy infrastructure plan of a generation. So next steps then, there's going to be public meetings held across Northern Ireland in May as part of the consultation process and to gather feedback. And following that, RPS Ireland will consider the consultation responses and make any required amendments to the environmental assessments. The finalised environmental reports will be provided to the department alongside an SEA statement, which summarises the processes undertaken and identifies how environmental considerations and consultations have been integrated into the OREAP. And if the final reports outline that significant adverse effects on the environment cannot be avoided, DFE, as the competent authority, will be required to complete an appropriate assessment of the plan. So thank you for your time this morning and giving us the chance to update you on offshore renewable energy and then the current consultation. Happy to take your questions, provide any clarification in the briefing. Of course, we'll keep you updated throughout the process whenever we finish the consultation and further on. Thank you.
Jimmy, thank you very much for that. And if I just begin, I suppose, as you rightly highlight, I know this is a really important opportunity for Northern Ireland. In terms of the delay of where we are just getting to today, had there just been a backlog in the department trying to get to this stage?
Yeah, so there's multiple stakeholders involved in the process for the strategic environmental assessment, and we had one of those key stakeholders was the Ministry of Defence, who we worked during a significant period of time last year to get the agreement that we could publish the strategic environmental assessment in its current form. So until we had that agreement to move ahead, we had paused the publication.
Fair enough. Okay. Sinead?
Okay. Just in relation to the legislation and regulation, obviously, if the legislation is not straightforward, it's to be laid by 2025. So if it's not straightforward, does that mean that it could move into the next mandate? I'm particularly looking at E1, E2 and E3 in the document.
So there's we need a primary bill for offshore renewable energy installations, and that has a few different aspects. So the decommissioning regime, safety and navigation rights. So we are working with the Office of Legislative Counsel now on getting the instructions to them so that will allow us to bring a bill to the Assembly. And the target to do that is in autumn 2025. So we remain on target to get that bill into the Assembly.
Okay. And do you think you're going to get it through this mandate then?
Yeah, all been well. If we can get through that process, if we can get it introduced in autumn, that should leave us then on target for this mandate, yes.
Okay. And then just going back on the skills of D3 and D4, where you're trying to build a workforce for the future. How are you progressing with that work? And who are you engaging with?
Yeah, it's a really important aspect of this plan. As you can see in the Offshore Renewable Energy Action Plan, there's multiple themes, and one of the themes around that's economic growth, and skills is a really important aspect. So we engage with obviously the skills side in the department and what we're going to need from the energy, and there'll be hopefully a green skills action plan published in the very near term. From the department that will consider energy impacts. The NEMO, the trade body, the cluster body, are also looking at this aspect, and we're working very closely. Invest and I sponsor through the collaborative growth program, sponsor the NEMO organisation. So Invest and I are included on our OREAP steering group, and that skills is very much part of our process. We know we're going to need to skill up the workforce certainly to deliver on our offshore ambitions.
And regarding the ambition as well, obviously the northwest, there's a couple of areas maybe around Foyle Port and that, but there's also the cross-border dimension. Are you looking at that aspect of it as well in terms of offshore?
Yeah, certainly aware of like the Source Galileo project as an example coming into Foyle. So that's there's a lot of potential around Foyle Port as an O&M location for the offshore wind industry. So we're very aware of that, and we've been working with Foyle Port and understanding what their future plans could be to help support that. So. And that opportunity is not just for the what will be delivered as part of the OREAP. It could be the wider they could service what's in Irish waters and beyond then as well. So we are aware of that opportunity too.
You're aware of the opportunity, but are you effectively working towards that opportunity? Yeah.
Yeah. The key challenge that we need to uncover is the regulation from the connection of an offshore generation site that is not in Northern Ireland waters into Northern Ireland waters. So there is certainly work to do to figure out the regulatory process for that to happen in the future.
Okay. Would you come back and update us on that, or even update the committee on if you get any clarification on that regulation?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You, Sinead? Padraig?
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation. Apologies, I missed some of it at the start there. Just have quite a few questions, and it's kind of to build on what members have been asking already. The public meetings is something I'm really interested in. I think it's obviously an essential part of what you're doing. I just wouldn't be sure on the public engagement on this issue or the detail that the public are across on this issue yet, because obviously that's quite niche. And even as a committee, I know we've been talking back and forward on the complexities of a lot of this stuff. So in terms of your public meetings, absolutely great that they're being done. But what information pre-meeting are you providing to people? How are you engaging beyond the key stakeholders? So obviously you're going to be looking at people who are really interested in this, who have a vested interest in this, but how are you engaging ordinary people in this? How are you getting beyond and getting a wider scope of opinion on this? Because I'm just conscious that because it is so complex, you're probably going to get a very, very small turnout at your public meetings, unless they're in an area that are directly impacted, in which you could get a huge turnout. What's the balance, or what are your plans around that?
Yeah, so we've been trying to bring along the different areas. So there's, as part of the OREAP, there's an Offshore Renewable Energy Forum, and that includes multiple councils and bodies, and it's basically I'm going to call it an open forum for people to participate and understand what's going on. I think that specific issue around it's not specific to offshore. I think that's probably a wider energy, and I think it's important for us to be able to communicate the energy ambitions, and we are, the energy strategy was the 2025 action plan was published this week. So I think the communications is absolutely really important. Yeah, we want to get as many people as we can participating in those meetings. So we have a bit of work to do over the next few weeks to really publicise that and ensure we have the right people in the room. But we're going to have ourselves and DFI, and DAERA and the Crown Estate as well, all in those meetings ready to answer the public's questions.
No, it's reassuring to hear that. And I think nearly even, and this might be part of your plan, so if it is, apologies, but I'm wondering, is there any kind of press you can do before that, just to very, very clearly lay out for people what's involved in this process? So even one of the questions I would have is, what are the key deliverables from this? Like, what does this mean? What's the impact for households? For what percentage is it going to make up of renewable targets and so on? So is that information available? Is that information going to be communicated before the public meetings? Because I think that would allow people to go in much more informed and with really specific questions rather than broad questions, which I'm sure you've answered multiple times. So it's to try and inform people as best you can.
No, I take your point, and probably a lot of that information is embedded within multiple. So we maybe just take away that how we maybe a succinct one pager for the public to take into the meeting.
That's it. It's the likes of the infographics, it's your one pagers, it's maybe a press release which can go to all media outlets just stating exactly what this is, and that there is going to be a series of public meetings. I just think it would make it much more clear cut. Just obviously to build on Sinead's point as well around the All Ireland plans, what engagement have you had with your counterparts in the south around this to ensure that best practice is passed across, but also that there's no duplication in your plans? Yeah,
so there's very ambitious plans in the south. Obviously with the size of the waters to get to 37 gigawatts by 2050, so we are aware of that, and so we've connected with colleagues in, I guess there's two departments who are looking at this, and DEC and the dairy side, and actually three on DUT, who are looking at the ports and what port infrastructure is needed. So we're trying to connect into those multiple departments to understand what their plans are, and then with the Department of Transport, then the potential shared island application with Belfast and the Port of Cork. So Belfast will invest 90 million, and they're looking at a shared island bid for their build out as well. So we are engaged in there too to understand, and
What's the frequency of that engagement? Is it kind of on a needs basis, or is it continuous? Is it ongoing, or what?
Yeah, it's probably now it's on a needs basis, but I think now that we're getting into some of the detail on this potential shared island bid, it's going to need to become much more regular to enable us to move that forward.
Okay, and just the final question for me, it's just again to build on the skills point, which has already been raised. You've mentioned about Invest being in the room, which is really important. In terms of your further education colleges, who have a huge workforce around skills, around the manufacturing end of this, and also your higher education workforce as well, have you engaged with those institutions specifically, or what's the ongoing engagement process there?
And they're all
We haven't engaged with them directly yet, but it's one of the actions within the action plan that we're hoping to take forward this year with our partners in Invest.
Okay, I think that would be to me that one's really time sensitive, because with further education colleges, I know our local college, the Northwest Regional College, is really responsive to, so say Alchemy Infantry, they can build these courses and really specific courses really quickly, but for higher education it's going to be more detailed, and you're going to need, I suppose, a longer process to build that in. There may be less responsive, and in terms of how they can respond to skills needs and economic needs. So just if that conversation could be prioritised, I think it'd be really useful, just to ensure that we're not kind of moving months behind, and because we're going to have to go on an academic timetable otherwise. So but I appreciate there's huge work going on, and it's brilliant to hear what you are doing at the minute, and all the pieces seem to be coming together, so it's really encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Diana?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation this morning. I just want to take you back to the tidal wave energy and the why. I think you indicated you've ruled it out. What are the reasons for that? What's the advantage of the fixed and floating turbines over the tidal measurement?
I guess maybe to put it crudely, it's just bang for your buck, really, and what's available. So it looked at that sort of initial technical feasibility, looked at wind speeds, waves, wave energy, and the depth of water, and there's probably a couple other factors there, but so it looked at all of those and what was technically feasible. So I think that was the key aspects that were looked at, and fixed, floating, and tidal were the only three that got through.
Okay. And just on another, I'm just reading the NISRA Energy Report 2024. It showed on page 227 of our pack just how far Northern Ireland is lagging behind in terms of renewables. We're 1.6 billion turnover compared to 51.4 billion in the UK or in England. And when you talk about the environmental assessments, what learning have you taken from what offshore energy in other parts of the UK?
Yeah, so it's great that we have a partner as in the Crown Estate that they're working with in this journey, because they've been through it in Great Britain. Yeah. So we're able to take some of the lessons learned for those sites that are already generating electricity in Great Britain, and bring it into our plans. And you mentioned there sort of the 1.6 to the 50 billion gap. The Crown Estate are about they have a supply chain accelerator, and I think it's a £50 million pot, and they're about to launch the second phase of that. So we're really keen that Northern Ireland companies will that are able to bid into that pot do for offshore, and that's not just specific to the Northern Ireland opportunity. It's wider opportunity in the south and Great Britain as well. And
how will you publicise that? What steps you take to really make that, to raise public awareness of that opportunity? Yeah, and we'll work with our partners and Invest and ensure that gets out to the wider business space. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for coming this morning. There's been a lot of retrospective analysis on climate change legislation and whether targets are achievable. Has the department changed its viewpoint on whether net zero by 2050 is achievable?
So I think we have to get there, I think is the key thing, and we have a couple of key milestones coming now in 2030 as well. We import we import a huge amount of our fossil fuels, or all of our fossil fuels today, and we need to reduce reliance on those to get away from the sort of the volatility of the price shocks, and to have our own renewable energy generation will help that. So I think it's not really, not as focused on that target piece. It's more what we need to do, what's the right thing for consumers to stop that importation of fossil fuels and have our own generation so that we can then become an exporter as well, potentially, of green fuels.
So an ambition to get there is one thing, and forgive me for pushing you on this, but has the department changed its viewpoint on whether or not 2050 net zero is achievable?
No.
It hasn't changed its viewpoint?
No.
Okay. So with that in mind, is it get there at all costs, or is there an acceptance of some of the costs to consumers that it's going to pile on in relation to the transition from fossil fuels whenever, for example, there's still volatility in a lot of this renewable in terms of the costs associated with build. We talk about grid connections, we talk about the huge challenges it faces. Is it get there at all costs, or is there a consideration to the taxpayer and to the general citizen as to what the cost of electricity will be in the future?
Yeah, and I think that's why, in energy, we're working across, I think we've maybe got 22 policy areas that we're trying to push forward in the department, because all of those are really important. We need each of those to move forward hand in hand, because they all will have an impact across power and heat and then transport as well. So that's why we need to move forward with all of those and ensure that we have enough onshore wind, some offshore wind, that we're reducing the reliance on fossil fuels, that we're decarbonising our heat, and all of those things need to come together to ensure that we're getting the right and the best outcome for our consumer.
When talking to your UK counterparts, is there an open debate as to whether the targets are attainable by 2050?
Well, we just got the Climate Change Committee's advice on next carbon budget, and there was UK advice and Northern Ireland's advice as well. So it sets out what we should be doing in Northern Ireland government to deliver those targets, and there's no indication there that that it's not achievable, and that we need to work and again bring those 22 policy areas on the energy side forward to deliver. There's a lot of other to net zero. Apart from energy, it's a big part of the story. But there's the wider, the agriculture and so on that will help deliver net zero as well. I understand energy is a big part of that.
Given your extensive research and analysis into offshore wind, does the department have any evidence or a position on what potentially can be more damaging to areas of outstanding natural beauty, onshore or offshore wind?
Yeah, so the strategic environmental assessment that's going on at the moment is really, really powerful. It's given us a lot of information across multiple SEA topics for each of the sites, and it starts to outline that. So the reason that that's been done at this level in the department, because that's a plan-led approach. Now, ultimately, when it gets down to the Crown Estate doing a leasing round and looking at each specific area, developers will do their own assessments and habitats regulation assessments. So that differs a little bit from onshore. And onshore is a developer-led approach and has been for multiple years now. So they will do all of their assessments for onshore, but we don't look at that as a department. We're looking at this offshore as a plan-led, and that's why we're leading this.
So we don't have a definitive opinion whether or not offshore or onshore would be more damaging to the natural environment?
I don't think we've looked at that specific point, no.
Okay. My colleague Diana Armstrong talked about floating, fixed and tidal. Is there a view on, you said in your answer to her, if I picked you up correctly, that it was what could give you the best bang for your buck? But is there consideration as to which could be more detrimental to the marine life when considering which form of renewable to use?
Yeah, so in the strategic environmental assessment, it looks at the technologies across that, and it does assess what the impact of each technology type and how that could impact the environment.
And do we have any evidence to suggest which form would be more detrimental to marine life? Is it tidal, is it floating, is it fixed?
I think it depends on the area, and it depends,
Okay.
around the coast.
In relation to the phased approach essentially accepts that there are areas in which none of these types of renewables would be acceptable. That's correct, yes?
Yes, absolutely. It lays out where, it screens out areas that it just wouldn't, be technically feasible to have for multiple different reasons, either environment or, shipping or whatever.
Okay, and how long is the public consultation due to run?
It closes on the 22nd of May.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jonathan. Gary?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation this morning. Just to follow on, actually, from Johnny's point there in terms of the impacts of offshore versus onshore, how will this plan interact with the offshore plans of the Scottish Government? I know that colleagues of mine, MPs, have raised concerns about the impact of some of the Scottish Government's plans around offshore, the impact that would have on UNESCO World Heritage Sites here in Northern Ireland. So how do you interact with the Scottish Government's plan? How, I suppose, the views of the people of Northern Ireland, how are they heard in respect of some of those proposals, and ultimately, people in Northern Ireland would maybe have to suffer the impact, certainly the visual impact on some of these tourist sites, whilst not seeing the benefit of them, particularly if they come from the Scottish Government side.
Yeah, I think, so to answer your question specifically, Scottish Government interaction's probably been limited, and it's maybe something we want to pick up going forward. We work with the Crown Estate, and I understand that there's the Crown Estate Scotland, which is devolved to Scotland, so we don't really interact as much there. But I think certainly a point that we can pick up on and understand plans there more.
No, I think it is important you do pick up on that, because I suspect when you do these round of public meetings, a lot of the issues that will be raised, whilst there will be factors around spend and targets, I think the majority of people who will be attending public meetings will be concerned of the impact that it will have on their personal lives. So obviously in particular areas there will be particular challenges. People will want to know that, as I say, there's a problem visually for people attending some of these sites, but also what the benefits will be to them as consumers. So I think if you could pick that up, that would be much appreciated. In terms of a follow-up, just in terms of the 2030 targets, and I completely agree with Johnny's point around the 2050, but 2030 comes sooner. And in terms of the particular milestones, could you talk us through how progress has been made and how you feel you're going to meet the 2030 targets, which obviously are more imminent?
So I think the first thing for members is that offshore will not contribute to the 2030 target. We're into the next decade for offshore generation. In terms of where we are right now, we're kind of in around the 40 to 45% mark for onshore. And that's mostly wind, some solar, and we are working on multiple different policy areas. The first in my remit is Renewable Electricity Support Scheme. Yeah. We haven't had a support scheme since the NIRA closed in 2017, so it's really, really important that we develop a new scheme to support onshore renewables in the first instance, and we'll look at then at offshore as a next phase in that support scheme. So we're working on that. The final design of that scheme is about to be published, and that'll give an update to market and industry on how things are developing. So we need to do that. Then the next thing is around the grid. NIE are making a significant investment of over 2 billion in the grid, and that is absolutely needed to support the 2030 target. We need interconnection, and the north-south interconnector is really, really important to help us deliver on targets, and then we need storage as well, both battery storage and then the potential then of hydrogen production to increase demand to help us on the targets as well. So kind of, as I talked about the 22 policy areas, there's just an example of a few of them.
Just a final question, just back to and I appreciate that, back to the offshore. In terms of your engagement with developers and those who want to invest. Certainly any engagement that I've had in the past, there was a lot of frustration, obviously around the slowness and potentially taking investment elsewhere. That engagement will, I'm assuming, ramp up now as the consultation continues. Is that?
And we meet regularly with, there's, again, as I said, there's a small amount of investors, and we meet with them when they want to talk about our plans. So we're really engaged with those few investors there are. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. And finally, David.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Talk about your renewable scheme, and we've heard about RIAA was supposed to hit committee in January. I think it was after Christmas. We were told renewables was supposed to hit kind of early 2025, and now you're telling us this is autumn, and there's a cynic in me is going, we'll be here this time next year going, where is this? So is there a timeline that is September, October, November from the department that we can actually bank in our schedule?
Yeah, so for the offshore
Yeah.
bill and the renewable electricity support scheme as well, we're probably potentially, let's say, going to put that in one renewable electricity bill that'll be combined, and it is in the legislative programme for those, and we hope again to have those in autumn, so it is on the timeline.
So what's that,
Yeah.
October?
Yep.
Right. So then if we look at this, the offshore, in that document you sent us, it says additional decisions, connection arrangements have not been made, but it will be progressed in close coordination with Sony NIE networks. So the offshore I get, but the onshore bit, is this an RP7? The connections for this already included in the grid connections to allow this to happen?
Yeah, I think the build out of the grid is needed to support. There's a couple of key locations.
But is the grid
to land?
And I see your map and I see where they are, but does the grid match that map? The RP7 proposals that are going forward, that funding, the 2 billion talked about, does that meet the connections to have the offshore in those points that you've shown?
So there's a couple of key connections that are already there,
Okay.
that are available, that at the moment are available or been held for offshore. So strategic locations that we're looking at, working with partnership with Sony
Okay.
and NIE. So we need to land those cables onto those locations, so that's key. And then, again, as I kind of talked about, all the things needing to move together. RP7 is critical to build out the grid generally for more electricity.
Yeah, no, I understand. What I'm trying to make a point is the grid in the positions for the offshore to be connected into?
Again, what
Well,
else
you've given us
yeah.
a map of
Yeah.
where those areas are. There's three rough areas. Whether that's fixed, whether it's floating, it's irrelevant. Is the grid on the land to connect those three areas?
It's the substations to connect to land. The connection onto land. That's the kind of key. That's the key.
Is
point.
that there? If we were to
It's there
build
right now.
that's there right
Yes.
now. So we don't
Yes.
need we don't need the grid upgraded to allow this to happen. So what
The electricity needs to move on.
within?
Onwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, well, and then lastly for me, just picking up on something you said about the universities and the colleges, you said you hadn't engaged yet. Now, if we're talking about 2030, any university takes 3 to 4 years to do the course. Anybody that applies next year for the following year. So we're 5-6 years out now from that. So why did that not happen first?
So there's been a lot of engagement in the skills group with the colleges on the skills that are needed generally across energy, and the green skills action plan will start to is going to deliver some of the actions that are required generally. So I think we can take away a point. Maybe we need to engage more specifically on the offshore ambitions with the universities, but that's not to say that the skills side of DFE haven't been working on general energy skills.
No bother. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, colleagues, thank you very much indeed for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, Peter.
Members, in summary, is the committee content to write to the department just seeking an update on the outcome of the consultation, seeking an update particularly on how the department is to address the regulatory gap associated with the sort of transmission and generation, getting the electricity from offshore to onshore, to encourage the department to ensure better public awareness of the impacts and the contribution of offshore energy to the carbon reduction targets, to encourage the department to engage more fully, more regularly with the FE and HE in terms of development of supporting skills, and also to encourage the department to engage with the Scottish Government on their offshore development plans, and to ensure that there's there's the appropriate synergies, I guess. But is that about it, members?
Content?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, item 7, members. I'm delighted to. Sam, good to see you again, sir. Andrew, I haven't had the pleasure, but good to see you. So, colleagues, we're going to receive a briefing from our kind hosts here at the Game of Thrones Visitor Centre. So, Sam, who's the Managing Director, and Andrew, who is the Executive Director. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for hosting us, and I'm very happy to hand over to you. Oh, yeah, perfect.
We may have to slip to one side,
Yeah.
Chair. Sorry.
I'll move my fat head out of the way.
No, I could never get a hat that fits my head.
You're welcoming us too. We're welcoming you and you're welcoming us at the same time.
Not working.
Just as a quick summary, I gave a sort of initial briefing. Really, I mean, one of the just before this sort of loads up, one of the overarching things, I suppose we opened in February 2022, which in itself was a challenging period. Opening sort of, well, Andrew was more involved in the actual development, but the background of COVID. So opening in a challenging time for tourism in general. I think at that time there was a lot of incoming flights were still being challenged, and there was a lot of backlog from tour operators and things like that. But from the in terms of one of the questions was about the creative arts. Don't know why that's. Don't know what control is for that.
Me too.
But from a little bit of history, this location itself was one of the primary filming locations for the Game of Thrones. So for I think 9 years or so,
Yeah.
7 of the 8 seasons. This room here was actually split into 2 offices that the directors would sit in, and the area outside that you kind of came in there would have been, hair and makeup, wardrobe. So there's from that creative arts element, this place has got a huge footprint within Northern Ireland in terms of that filming industry. And one of the big sort of stories that we're trying to tell is not just that it's a visitor attraction, but it's also people can learn all the different skill sets that go into what it takes to make not only a TV show or a film, but one of the greatest or most successful TV series of all time. And I think from the success of Game of Thrones, which this building's a big part of, it's also opened up a huge amount of opportunities to other TV series and films that have now been shot here. So we have a really strong footprint with that one, with NI Screen, and one of the things we see ourselves as is not just a tourist attraction, but also really a somewhere where people are sort of probably younger adults than children necessarily, but can be inspired to work in the film industry from here, and then we can actually help support that journey from them enjoying this experience, but seeing the behind the scenes, and then going on to working in the film industry. I think we listed out about 130 or so different careers that you could do in the TV and film industry. So it's not just about being an actor or being a cameraman, or you could do hair, makeup, costume design, and then there's a lot of set design and everything else as well. So a lot of industries are tied in. So from the creative arts perspective, this is a benchmark really, and it's kind of where part of that journey started. So just to give a bit of a summary on where we are as a business and what we're doing and how how our journey's going. This is the only place in the world we come face to face with the screen used costumes, props and weapons from the TV show itself. So we have thousands of actual artifacts from the show, sets, and we'll go through obviously. Part of it is a tour, so you can follow the footsteps of the cast and crew, and also as a tourist attraction, but also for events that we hold in these areas. People are sitting in rooms that were used for the making of the show. Right outside, you can see a ship in the car park there, which was used in the show, and we have loads and loads of behind the scenes images of the actual show being put together here. As an introduction, obviously located here in Banbridge, and it was one of the principal film studios for Game of Thrones. Opened February 2022. It's one of the largest indoor attractions on the island of Ireland. Probably the other two would be Guinness Storehouse and Titanic. One of the benefits we have over those two is the fact that we're all on one level. So from the point of view of people who are in wheelchairs, but also the overall sort of customer flow is much easier. But 110,000 square foot. We've also got a lot more space that we can build into should the need come. Fully immersive tour, showcasing props, costumes, sets, and interactive experiences that demonstrate the making of a TV series. So you can actually walk through and see all the different elements that come together. What we want to be, we want to be in a position where we are a must-see and must-do visitor attraction, and I'll speak a bit more about this through the next couple of slides. But really, we feel like we should be up there with the likes of Titanic. For me personally, if you're going to London or anywhere and you come back, you'll see Titanic everywhere. Now, it's an iconic building, but Titanic, because I think recently I've mentioned, that 8 million people over the last 12 years, I think. They've just celebrated their 13th birthday, 12 or 13 years. So there's a significant amount of awareness everywhere you look about Titanic, about Guinness Storehouse, and we feel like we should be up there with them as a must-see, must-do attraction. Based on, the investment is one thing, but also the experience. It is a world-class experience. It's a world-class customer experience, and the Game of Thrones brand itself is synonymous in Northern Ireland, and is something that I think we should all be proud of. I've been, people have said different sort of quotes about it, but we're very fortunate that we have it here, and it's got a genuine attachment to the region, and pretty much everyone knows somebody that maybe was an extra on the show or had part involvement with the show, so we can all attach to it there. So we see it as a must-see, must-do in general, but also film tourism, and Visit Britain now are doing a huge drive this year. It's about what they clock. It's either sort of screen tourism, film tourism, or also what's the other term is set jetting, which is where people go to. In Game of Thrones itself, people go to Dubrovnik to see sets of Game of Thrones. People go to other countries to see sets that real life sort of New York, and they might see elements of films that were shot there. So that's a huge drive, and we see ourselves as the real pillar of that film tourism. There isn't anything else like it, and really within that's within the UK and Ireland combined, you've only really got Harry Potter's probably the only other comparison, which is the iconic one in the UK as well. So location and getting here, obviously, I know some people have been caught up by this because they went to the Boulevard, which is probably a real life example. But due to planning conditions when we first opened, we do have a park and ride offering, which is at the Boulevard. As a location, it's very good in the fact that there's other things people can do there as opposed to just being a car park. But it's 4.5 miles away. The shuttle buses run every 20 minutes. But that facility costs us about £500,000 a year, so it's excessive, equivalent of about £11 per visitor based on the visitors we have. We've got car parking on site for about 180 cars. We are currently going through an application. We're quite deep into that application to get permission to plan and change to get parking on site, and I suppose that's just one thing we continue to engage locally and also with Tourism Northern Ireland and the council to go through that process. So there's a PAD application submitted. We had a public consultation which we did on a voluntary basis 2 weeks ago. We had some of the sort of local neighbours come in and ask questions, and generally the feedback was very positive. People want us to be successful, but this is a barrier to people coming here, you know, and also it's a significant cost as well. So we are through that process, and as I said at the bottom there, fully supported by tourism stakeholders, but this would have a huge impact on the business from a cost point of view, and also from being able to, well, literally drive visitors, but literally in terms of actually getting here. It wouldn't stop that partnership with the Boulevard. I think we can still continue a good engagement because they, you know, we're both kind of sort of domestic tourism, but that would be very helpful. It's also in case of events as well. This is a phenomenal events venue. Whether you're using the area we're in here or as we go through the tour, you know, we had on Thursday night the Nilga event here for 230 people, and it's an amazing event to do a unique dinner like that. But again, parking, technically speaking, you know, we should be parking everyone at the Boulevard and bussing people in, which is a barrier when we're talking to events that maybe we're in competition with Europa or other places in Belfast, and that so that would be that's just one of our challenges, that we are going through that process, but any support is obviously always welcomed.
Just on that as well, part of that planning application that we're seeking to deal with as well as one of the restrictions that we have, or conditions upon us, is we have to be off site by 10 p.m. Again, it's a massive barrier to being able to generate feed inquiries right the way through the system into winning business. And 10 p.m. is really, well, you know, from a local perspective, in terms of trying to, you know, capture trade and keep trade locally, I think it's a big barrier, because at 10 p.m. you can kind of flush everybody back to wherever they want to go, back to Belfast or Dublin, and it completely rules out any kind of nighttime trade for the locality. So that's another area that we're trying to resolve through this planning application.
And, that would more be for events, you know, the general public, you know, like comparison to the Titanic, you know, you wouldn't really be open beyond sort of 6-7 o'clock anyway for the normal, but that would be more for events. I mean, looking at the location, we know where we are, but you know, we're only a short distance from the main link between Belfast and Dublin, you know, so our location is actually very positive, and I think it ties into sort of T&I strategies over the last few years to try and bring tourism outside of, you know, into the regions as well. So, but we, you know, we couldn't. Our location is very positive, and that would just make that journey a lot more streamlined. You know. As a general business update, the landscape's obviously been challenging on several fronts. So, but one of the other challenges we have, which we work through with Tours in Northern Ireland, is there's lots and lots of operators that run tours using Game of Thrones. You know, they're not licensed at all, which there is a big risk there from a PR point of view if something bad was to happen. As an example of one in Croatia, where two Australian couple were doing a Game of Thrones tour in Dubrovnik and fell off a wall, and the lady broke her neck and was in hospital for 9 months in Croatia. And the headline is, you know, this happened on Game of Thrones tour. So Warner Brothers have got a responsibility there, as well as obviously just everyone really on that. You know, it has reduced because I think a lot of people see us as the official, but it's still there. You know, just to look through the Tours in Northern Ireland website, and you know, there's ourselves, and then we're in competition with a lot of these operators, and some of them are good companies, but you shouldn't. It's like me opening up a Coca-Cola copy. I'll be shut down in hours, you know, or McDonald's or whatever. So it's strange that it's allowed to happen and encouraged almost. So that was a challenge at the beginning, definitely. It's still a challenge now, but gradually, you know, we are seen as the official and the original. We pay a royalty, and we have significant, you know, challenges with Warner Brothers in terms of approvals. We can't just, an example, last year, George R.R. Martin came here, who wrote the show. For us, if he's here that day, we would have to go through maybe 2 days of approvals before posting something on LinkedIn. He was in a Game of Thrones escape room, which is just, I forget the name of the street in between sort of Merchant and the Bullet. They're kind of there. There's escape rooms there. He's in that attraction, and they post it same day, and because it's posted the same day, it's in the Belfast Telegraph that night. You know, we can't do that for good reason, because we have to go through the right approval, so we're almost more limited than them. They can just do whatever they want, you know, so that's always been a challenge. Generally, we've had a year-on-year increase in our visitor numbers. That's the 35% in 2024, and about 30% increase from 23 to 22. And this year, we target about 150,000 people as our sort of targets for this year. and we've been doing quite a lot of restructuring to get the operating costs into a position where, being at a point of being break even, in the next 18 months is our objective, and we're on track for that. But again, there's been challenges with the tourism market in general this year, which I'll get onto. But we're moving in the right direction, making the right business decisions, and really getting high level stakeholder relationships in place, particularly with Tourism Northern Ireland, Tourism Ireland, and the local council as well. Our sort of 3-year plan will be get to about 400,000 visitors. Just as an example, that car park we're talking about, 150 spaces would be able to accommodate over 300,000 people. So it's really minimal sort of numbers. No more. Traffic wise wouldn't be excessive at all. And that's what we're going through that process, because we have bus operators and we have shuttle buses from Belfast and Dublin that come every day as well. 3 from Belfast and 1 from Dublin. So those things, all the infrastructure is in place for us to scale and grow to a good level. And we've had, again, recent endorsements from George R.R. Martin himself. But one of the things on that point there, George R.R. Martin wrote the Game of Thrones, and Dan Weiss, who's mentioned there, was the executive producer of the show. Neither of them knew we existed, which is an awareness challenge. We can do so much, but without, it needs to be also pushed through from Tourism Ireland, Tourism Northern Ireland as well. So that awareness is increasing, but I think a lot of people have been here and didn't really know we were here, or thought we were it was a temporary exhibit by Titanic for a number of years. So that's just this continuous push and a continuous drive to get that awareness up.
I think it's probably fair to say we haven't quite had the buy-in specifically from the tourism agencies in the early part of our existence, and really to achieve that kind of always-on subliminal messaging that comes from the tourism agencies. It's not necessarily about specific campaigns to drive us. It's about that always-on kind of subliminal messaging, which is part of the tourism agency's kind of larger, I suppose, mandate for the area. There's very rarely you would see any tourism advertising that doesn't incorporate some kind of subliminal messaging of Titanic or Guinness Storehouse or Giant's Causeway. That's the kind of support we're kind of looking for, is that always kind of switched on support. And I think from a basis as well on the level of investment that has been made in this facility, to have restructured the business at this point, to pull it back from where the original expectations are, just because the environment is definitely different. But achieving a 400,000 visitors per annum, which is very achievable given the numbers that are here, even with a slight dip in tourism, actually puts this facility and this investment on a very, very good track. Again, it probably has a lot less kind of financial burdens on it than potentially Titanic or others. So our numbers are, those lower numbers are actually, are definitely game changing for us. So support to kind of achieve that through the tourism agencies and that kind of subliminal messaging is really a kind of an important part of this journey.
You'll probably be aware of this anyway. Obviously, see certain numbers come out over the last few days, but CSO statistics show a 30% decrease in overseas visitors to the island of Ireland. And I think January was about 25% drop, which is obviously concerning. And I know there's loads of different factors and things spoken about. But just from our point of view, there's a few things impact that. We're probably not we're in a position of continuing to grow because our numbers are on the lower side. But there's certain elements that are challenging. The general cost here is just even doing benchmarking just this week. You can do a benchmark you can look on Booking.com and do a benchmark of Dublin versus cities like Rome and Barcelona and Paris, and you'll find Dublin being more expensive than all of them. We've all probably been in a position where there's something on, could be a concert on in Belfast or Dublin, and all of a sudden every hotel's full, and you might only have 2 or 3 hotels available, even though there's a lot of hotels in both cities, but the availability just disappears quite quickly. And this is feedback from tour operators as well, particularly when I've been fortunate enough to have experience working around the world, and I've had a lot of experience with Chinese tour operators. They won't be necessarily coming here and sort of hotel hopping like some tourists do, where they go to one hotel and move around. They want to probably, Ireland is quite small in comparison, so they might stay in a hotel for 4 or 5 days. It's just not possible to get a hotel for 4 or 5 days in a row. It's very challenging. So that cost and availability is a big challenge. The ETA is obviously a big one, hot enough topic at the moment. And again, I've just been requested to do a quote there. But the real impact, the real thing from us is to make it as seamless as possible. I think it's here to stay, and it'll be in every country in the next 18 months. So how do we make it more seamless to the end customer? It is a challenge, but £10 rising to £16. Okay, it's a small cost to pay in relation to the cost of your trip, but making the journey as seamless as possible. I gave the example of somebody recently that would come to Ireland. Probably, it's a friend of mine who lives in America, come to Ireland maybe 3 times a year. They kind of half panicked and did it in January, but their trip's not till June, and it's 2 years from January. So she said she should now. She knew how easy it was. May as well have done it in May. So she gets a full 2 years out of that one application. So it's just making that as seamless as possible, I would say. And then the fourth point in terms of offerings, a little bit like myself and Andy have said, for many years, the tourist boards have continued to use attractions to drive awareness. So Titanic Belfast, Guinness Storehouse, Cliffs and Moher, Giant's Causeway being key ones. I mean, I know because we're part of certain industry associations, Giant's Causeway itself, their objective last year was to reduce attendance to Giant's Causeway because of the traffic issue. So Titanic and Guinness Storehouse are almost at capacity. So these locations actually have capacity challenges. We can accommodate in the region of about 750,000 to 1 million people, but we're currently doing 100,000 people. We've got the capacity to help. I think although we're 3 years old, we're relatively new because of the awareness. So I think there's an opportunity within some of these tourism drops to actually use somebody like ourselves as a new attraction to say, come to Ireland and experience this, and it could be other new attractions that have opened. There's been other investments in other areas. So there's kind of a stagnation, in my opinion, and speaking to people of seeing the same things all the time. So there's an opportunity to sort of just adapt that a little bit. And as I said at the bottom, we've got the capacity to absorb that. Where there's a new type of customer, particularly again looking at, I say it's a fairly significant campaign on Visit Britain for film tourism. Not that, and there's a balance between that feeding into T&I, but I think just as a comparison, they're talking about places like there's certain parts of Wales and Cornwall that being big drivers of Game of Thrones through House of the Dragon, which is the other. So you're seeing the comparison there versus what we can do. So there's a big opportunity there to just freshen things up a little bit. But some of the other challenges I know are wider spread in terms of you can't just go and build a bunch of new hotels or looking at capacity. But there's a lot of different reasons in our view of why you see these drops, but we've got everything in place to be able to accommodate. Just in terms of from an investment and funding, obviously we've had a few sort of meetings with either Tourism Northern Ireland. We had, I think it was in November, Conor Murphy was here with a group with Tourism Northern Ireland, Tourism Ireland, the local council as well. So just as an understanding for everyone here, this business was opened with the backing of a £50 million cash investment from the Stevens family office. So the Stevens Inc. and John Hogg Group obviously both have a stake in this business, have a long-standing relationship, but obviously Andy could probably speak more.
Yeah, the John Hogg Group is a local business. Local family business who would have owned this facility, and there's a very kind of strong connection just personally with the Stevens family, which is probably one of the largest boutique banks in America. So their family office invested in this, and it was really on the basis of being an opportunity to license a global brand in a region that has the authenticity to showcase it, as I say, it's a massive investment, probably one of the largest investments cash-wise into Northern Ireland in the last number of years, and it's come in partially because of that relationship a little bit under the radar. So it has, and to date, other than a very small portion of of local council funding to help with just a case study early on, and a bit from Tourism Northern Ireland, just on a marketing report. It really has received no funding at all, grant wise or funding wise over the course of that. And given our journey, and given the given the application that we now seek to achieve, we kind of are hopeful to try and achieve some level of assistance to achieve that, given that it's really based on a restructure, just because the environment has changed slightly, and we're having to make some changes in order to stabilise the business going forward. But we see ourselves here for the long term, as do our investors. And as Sam mentioned, we had a meeting in November with the minister and all of the attendant agencies, and our Warren and John, our two sort of main investors, flew over from the US for that meeting. And that was really to really look at are there any levers that can be pulled to help with some assistance as we move ourselves through what we see as an up an up, well, I suppose the next leg of the journey of the tour. So really that is that's still a live element. And I think if I'm right in saying, I think Stevens would welcome any kind of assistance at this point, just to show some kind of togetherness in that journey, given the commitment that they've made. Incidentally, 4 days after that meeting, Warren was nominated as the incoming US ambassador to the UK. And I understand, I think what Warren takes up office maybe in May, as early as May. So he's heavily committed to Northern Ireland, albeit he's politically engaged, and his son John is now CEO of Stevens Inc. But there's a very strong connection there. There will be there'll be a lot of goodwill towards Northern Ireland at that point as well. So it's worth mentioning. It's a position of importance there, and we have an in there. So again, just making sure everyone is aware of that position that's now there. So really, I think off the back of that as well, it's a little bit kind of maybe more difficult for kind of single track people like myself to understand. I know we have significant growth deal funding and significant sort of plans for tourism attractions throughout Northern Ireland as a whole. And there, that we're talking about, hundreds of millions of pounds, where we have now a slight dip in tourism numbers and significant pots of money that are potentially being earmarked for new product. We're hoping for a little bit of assistance, which is a drop in the ocean to those kind of figures, to I suppose to fine-tune a world-class attraction that we have on our doorstep and is operating, and doesn't need a lot to get itself to a position of great importance to the infrastructure in Northern Ireland. I think it's probably, that's me on that slide. Sorry, your ears are probably sore now.
Just as an overall summary, really, as it said, we're the only official sort of tour in the world of its kind. It's particularly, and the only real licensed Game of Thrones product in the world. It's one of the largest visitor attractions on the island of Ireland. Ideal location, I would say, given the fact that we're not in the city centres, but we're on that pathway. We've got fully licensed food and drink offerings, but also off the back of that, massive opportunity for events where people are looking for something different, a bit unique, and we can host events up to 300 people. Probably can push that slightly higher as well. Our retail store we have a retail store with over 500 different items of Game of Thrones product, which is massively successful. The huge visitor footfall potential. So as I said earlier, really importantly, we can we can accommodate over 750,000 people a year, probably pushing that to 1 million people. We've got capacity to expand. We've also got quite a lot of outdoor space, which we're looking at trying to enhance as well, where we can include outdoor events as well. But obviously that car park will be first part of using some of that space. But so the potential's massive. It's really getting us from where we are now to the next stage, and then moving beyond there. So we've got huge potential. We've got the team in place to do it. We've got all the infrastructure in place to do it, pending obviously the parking. And it's just about getting that, rounded support, being seen as one of the must-see, must-do things on the island of Ireland, and also adding another string to our bow in the fact that we classify it under education, but it's really careers in education, I suppose, where we can be, particularly in relation to the creative arts, where we can be a real sort of motivator for anyone that wants to work in the film industry to just come here, visit, and then we can show them that career path as well, and support on that journey. We have a starting relationship with Ulster University to create sort of an education programme, more for secondary schools, but that's leading up to, and then leading into universities, and then careers and internships and things like that. So the potential's huge. As Andy said, we've got the really supportive backers as well, and the business is going nowhere, but we want to continue that level of rounded support, really. So I think that's us.
I think just on a compliment, which I probably should have mentioned, I think there was a letter from John Stevens to the Minister at the time, following the visit, on-site visit. I think as part of that letter, I don't know how widely those letters are circulated within the system at all. As part of that letter, Stevens, with their connections in the US, were very open to helping make attendant introductions should any of our politicians be in the US, and specifically looking for any particular sectors. So I don't know. Again, with the Minister having moved on at that point, then I don't know whether that falls flat or whether that there. But I noticed the First Minister and Deputy First Minister were in the US for such a visit, and Stevens are very willing to help make attendant introductions there as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, gentlemen. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. And firstly, can I thank the committee for coming down here? I think it's so important to see you guys, number one, to open such a facility in such a difficult time. I think you're to be commended in your foresight to do so. And particularly given that it was private investment, foreign private investment, is certainly something that we should welcome. I think it did go largely under the radar given some of the sensitivities involved with the facility and also its location and essentially some of the challenges. You've mentioned some of the challenges, and COVID brought one of them, so it was a wave after wave. You had to work within certain planning parameters at that time. I think largely a lot of those initial fears about such a facility has largely we've been able to prove some of those things not to come to fruition, some of the challenges that it may face. I suppose my key question to you would be, is it your opinion that because you were self-funded, that in a sense Tourism NI, Tourism Ireland, and indeed any other government department and advertisement, is it a sense that those that are supported financially by deep departments and their arm's length bodies are more likely therefore to be promoted in that sense than an organisation that is a totally private funded?
It's a very good question, Jonathan. Thank you for that. No, I think it's probably fair to say timing was a big element within how that happened, as everyone kind of rushed to come out of COVID. I certainly, from my perspective, having gone into the construction and there having not been COVID, to then have to adapt through that. My initial thought was that it would level the playing field and everyone would then come out together into the market again. That was absolutely not the case, because what you'd find is an awful lot of visits, tours that had been planned, had already been bought, but were actually then just put onto, kind of a 2-year voucher type system. So what you find is that sudden influx after COVID was all pre-booked tours from before COVID. So it took nearly a year or 2 years for that to flush through, and I think everyone just naturally went back to the way they'd done everything before, and I think, yes, our private investment and the slightly, kind of, I suppose, under the radar element of how that came to fruition probably it didn't raise us to where we and our stakeholder engagement early on probably wasn't as effective as it should have been. So I think system awareness wasn't necessarily there.
Because I think what would concern me is that I think it's quite counterproductive. So you're absolutely right in what you said, that Tourism Ireland, Tourism Northern Ireland, you've been very successful in embedding in the mind of the domestic audience and indeed the international audience places like the Giant's Causeway and Titanic, and they're part of our story and fabric and have been hugely successful at bringing visitors.
Yeah.
But those particular projects have been so heavily supported by the department and its arm's length bodies. In a sense, those organisations that are prepared to essentially put their money where their mouth is with a built architecture and facility, to not receive that support would be something that would be worrying to me. So I think it's something maybe we can look into about that proportionality to ensure that they're funded. I'm not going to hog this meeting because I know that there's other members that have come to it, and I'm grateful for that. The final question from me would be on the ETA aspect, and I think you're largely right in what you're saying. It's largely an awareness issue as well. For the Game of Thrones set, is your market largely your attractive market from international guests, largely the United States? Is that correct?
It is, but we have unlike Titanic, who've had 10 or 12 years of the benefit of the local market and the Republic, the ROI market. We haven't had the awareness or necessarily the kind of the early tourism agency support to market us, within the island of Ireland. So I would say, to be honest, over the next 2 years, we have a significant, potential draw of our local market, which is yet untapped, unlike Titanic, who have kind of tapped it. I think that's where an awful lot of our footfall will come from. I think more worrying for us is that we know the feedback on the tour is 5-star reviews. You'll see that yourselves as you go round. The tour speaks for itself. What my concern is, and what we're addressing now, is the parking on site, because I don't believe our local market are prepared to go 4.5 miles away, get kids out of the car, get onto a bus, come here, go back again, and likewise our local market from here don't want to drive past the door, get the bus back, drive back past the door again. So I think that car parking in our current planning application is absolutely critical to our future. From that perspective and ease of access to the tour.
No, that's for now. Just suppose my point was that is there a real lack of understanding? Is it more a lack of understanding and knowledge of the process from the likes of the US visitor as opposed to the £16 charge, whatever it may be? Is that your experience?
Yeah.
But I think that'll clear up. I think at the moment there's a lot of negativity around it being there, and then we're asking for exemptions and stuff like that. But once that's passed, and so a lot of the press would be about that. So at the moment it's a bit of a barrier. Okay. I think once it goes past, I think there needs to be a more positive spin on some of it to say it's easy. You can do easy, it's affordable, built into your fees, and
especially for an international.
Yeah, audience. For an international person coming in, and again, it's going to. I think in the next 18 months, it's going to change to most countries anyway. I believe, from my understanding. Just on your first question. Sorry, just one thing to add on. To add to that is over the next probably the climate in the next 5 years, there's talk about Belfast Stories, which is £100 million investment into which will be a phenomenal attraction, and again part of the story as well. You've got other attractions getting that benefit as well, and they're all going to have to be marketed, and so all of a sudden the landscape becomes. If they're marketed and all of a sudden Titanic's visitation drops by 200,000, is that going to mean they're going to be pushing? So everyone else is asking for a bit more. We're asking for, so I think that's why we added it in. It's great that there's more things to do here, but the reality is a lot of that that's part of the city and growth deals and things. So I think
there's that point of, you know, they can't fail, you know. So this,
Yeah.
so, and then we're in this position, as you said, where, you know, we're kind of private. So I think
I think-
I think it's an all round. As a tourist, you can come in, you can do 5 or 6 things over the case of 2 or 3 days, and it needs to be that. And some of them, the cable car on the Mons is just down the road, you know, and we can bundle together with them. We work quite closely with Hillsborough Castle and that as
yeah.
well. So there's things where we can collaborate together. But yeah.
But are there any other attractions, not of similar scale to this? This would be one of the largest, but even on a smaller scale that haven't had attendant funding or backing. I would say this is one of very few
That's what we're
that haven't had anything in terms of that support. So, but you know, we're problem solvers. That's why we look at the ETA as well. Whereas a lot of other attractions are much more kind of focused on the support levels that they currently have, whereas we kind of tend to approach these things with problem-solving mindset.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
And where is the current application sitting then?
It's current. The consultation reports are now all in. And I think we now have a 2-week process that our planning consultant is writing up the application. So we would expect that to be submitted with the council by the end of April.
Okay.
And that's it's a discussion we will be having with John McGrillen again, with this slight restructure. There is around about between sort of £500,000 and £800,000 worth of cost to reformat the business should that planning be successful. So that we're trying to look at how we can work together to achieve that. But just from that perspective, I mean, just to make the application, there's about an £80,000 cost to do that. So it's all kind of coming at us.
Okay. Padraig?
Thank you, and thanks for your presentation and for hosting us today as well. Really appreciate that. I'm just wondering, and I know you've provided a lot of the statistics during your presentation, but in terms of your economic impact assessment, I'm assuming you have one of those. What's your net kind of benefit to the local economy, and are there any of the figures within that you could share with us?
It's the last economic impact assessment that we did was really was based on the first application that we did. Our planning consultant is currently writing another economic assessment. I think I don't have those figures with me right now, but it's with what we're trying to do in terms of our conditionality changes within that. There certainly would be a much more sort of prevalent local economic uplift with the fact we're trying to encourage people to use here for events later on at night, which will create hotel rooms or bed night stays and so on. And Sam's in discussion with a number of hotels locally as well. We can provide those figures within the next week or 10 days, if that's helpful. Sorry,
that would be
I don't
great.
have them on me.
It's just for context and just to contextualise it, because obviously you have a huge and a really significant offering here, so it's to contextualise that compared to other similar or different offerings across the north.
Just an example of the event we had on Thursday night, because obviously lots of councils all over the country, came, but every hotel, there's not that many hotels here, so 9 rooms at the Belmont down the road, but a lot of people were staying. The ones that stayed over stayed in sort of between here and Lisburn, so there's not a huge amount, but we have 55 staff, and pretty much all of them are literally from the very local area as well. So there's a big impact, yeah.
Okay.
But I think in terms of the original sort of tourism Northern Ireland strategy, this facility was largely based on that. I think at the time it was kind of termed as stickiness, which was to bring people kind of from Dublin or from the south, bring them into Northern Ireland, slow them down on the way to Belfast. So we've got anywhere between a 1 hour and a 3 hour dwell time here, and slow them down so that you're actually helping create bed night stays in the rest of the in the rest of Northern Ireland, depending on what tour route people were going on. But I'll get those figures from that.
Thank you. And I suppose that brings me neatly on to my next question, which is around the breakdown of your visitors then. So in terms of your stats, like what is your kind of breakdown, domestic versus international? And also in terms of, I don't know, do you collect this data or maybe not, but in terms of visitors who fly into Belfast compared to Dublin, that mightn't be something that you kind of monitor, but is there even, I suppose, a qualitative assessment of the comparison there?
Yeah, we actually literally yesterday went live with a new ticketing system, so in terms of the reports it'd be slightly better, but because at the moment the way it's categorised is anyone from Northern Ireland, it was GB and Northern Ireland combined, which isn't great, because I would say a good chunk of those would be from Northern Ireland, the domestic, and then obviously the GB market in terms of, coming over for 2 or 3 day stays. You're looking at statistics from TNI. But the American market is about 20-25%. Mainland Europe will be about the same. And then we have a growing Asia market, but I think in general, the island of Ireland, that is growing since COVID, so that's a channel this year that will grow to probably about 10% through certain channels. But we're working independently with tour operators there instead of relying on sort of local tour operators doing that. So, and then other would be kind of mixed areas. Game of Thrones, funnily enough, there's certain markets that are huge for Game of Thrones. Like South America is a big market for Game of Thrones, funnily enough. But and actually in terms of film tourism was one of the key drivers that I think the Visit Britain campaigns are looking at, naming those markets. But generally, it's kind of domestic being, we have the split between GB and Northern Ireland, and then Republic of Ireland as well. So would be a huge percentage. But we can get the full statistics over.
I'd be really interested to see that, because I suppose it's getting a better indication of which way traffic flows.
Yeah.
So are people coming from Belfast down, or are they coming from Dublin up?
Bit of both, yeah.
And I suppose it's to get an assessment of, are they coming and they're travelling right across Ireland, or they're travelling just within the north? So it's to get that assessment of how that works, because I think that's really informative, both for yourselves, but for us to kind of assess the impact. So for instance, like I know David and I both went to your other site today, and that was just naturally where I went. So it's even to see in terms of signage, where's that best placed? How does that work best? And it's to get those kind of concrete stats in place so that assessment can be done, I think would be really useful.
We have, just on that, we run buses from Belfast and Dublin. The Belfast one goes 3 times a day. And to be honest, it's less to do with the volume, it's more to do with the relationship we pay TransLink. It's the same price for 3 buses, it does 3 routes basically. But the Dublin bus, we typically run 1 a day. But if we get to capacity, we run the second one. But the Dublin bus now has more people on it than the Belfast bus, which might be, you might think, well, yeah, so it would, but up until last year it was the other way around, and we have moved that bus to be right central, so it's by the sort of Molly Malone statue there, right in the middle, so it's, as opposed to being at Connolly Station where it was before, so it's a better location. But so that'll be an indication, but you'll see that kind of rising, because we're trying to tell people that it's easy. You can be in the centre of Dublin, you can either come up here and continue your journey onto Belfast as part of that journey anyway, or you can be back, you could go on a 10 o'clock bus and be back in Dublin by 4, making it easy. But from your point of view, in terms of what you're trying to see there, we can look at certain statistics and we kind of marry them up with government statistics as well to see that picture. Yeah.
No, absolutely, and I appreciate that. I think that those are like a really natural kind of prerequisite to kind of understanding where and getting the context of here in terms of its relevant location. My last point just on skills as well is around you've obviously mentioned the skills offering that you have, which is fantastic, and I know there's been a lot of talk around Mageean and the skill sets in Mageean around filming and other associated kind of production and so on as well. What's your relationship like with Ulster and with other training bodies as well? Do you have a relationship? Is there something that, I suppose, in our role as the Economy Committee, can we be encouraging institutions to work more closely with you, more collaboratively? I know there's huge work already going on. Can you talk to us about that as well?
With Ulster University, it's probably we had a group come in about a month ago, so they're actually in that area out there, about 100, but just under about 90 children from different, probably more secondary schools. So the way it works is, but it's more through their very sort of niche with their costume design sort of kind of more like fashion, you know, within the arts. So it's just not necessarily specifically on filmmaking, but it's more that kind of the intricacies that goes into making costumes for. And in our case, you'll see them as you go around; they're quite detailed, and the intention is to build on that. But you'll end up finding you'll be dealing with different divisions within there. You know, we would like to be talking to the film guys. We have a relationship with SRC because it's again down the road, and obviously with certain courses, vice versa. Some of our staff have gone on courses, but we've also had people come down from different groups. But yeah, I mean, any further encouragement would be greatly appreciated. I think just to continue to accelerate that. Reality is, I think you know we can do there is a slight challenge. I mean, I've got 3 children in primary school, and as much as they could come, I know my oldest is in P7, could come here and have an absolute great time. But with Game of Thrones itself is an 18, and you know, one parent that sees Game of Thrones logo at the top of that page on the school trip could you know, it could be risky for that. So although we know it's a family, it's absolutely fine for children. We're going to try and leverage off Linen Mill Studios is the business name. Linen Mill Studios, which is the top of this, is the sort of, we're trying to almost use Linen Mill Studios as it's a film course. The subject is Game of Thrones, if that makes sense. But that's something we'll go through, and we can ease it off. But yeah, I mean, 100%, it can be, you know, whether it's, we just chose Ulster University to start just to get a relationship there. But you know, whether it's Queen's or
I think in
Ulster,
terms of range, we've got sort of learning objectives, you know, from Key Stage 1 right through to we're currently in discussions, although it hasn't been finalised. Yet at all, is to then actually feed in people back into the industry. So people, we're trying to showcase the skill sets here rather, and Game of Thrones is quite simply the collateral used to show the skill set. And I think Northern Ireland Screen offer a number of 100 apprenticeships every year into the industry. So what we want to do is we want to capture that interest of people as they're coming around, and then start. You know, we can then waypoint them into Northern Ireland Screen. So what we're trying to do is capture that entire range. So we're becoming relevant to educational systems with the help of Warner and all their key stage learning objectives with Harry Potter, adapt them for here, and then work with those educational authorities the whole way through, then become partners with the universities, and also then feeding people into the industry via the Northern Ireland Screen apprenticeship programme.
And we spoke to Northern Ireland Screen about having, for example, on the exit, is having kind of, without sounding too cheap, but like a jobs board on what jobs are available in the industry as you're walking out, kind of as part of that. But we want to kind of make it look presentable and look professional and have a proper collaboration. So there's good discussions, but we are from our side, as part of our growth, is really engaging in those conversations and getting them turned into something meaningful.
I think that's really important because people can see the concrete and get a concrete understanding of exactly what's involved across the array of roles that you offer. And can train people for. So it's a huge opportunity for students as well, and definitely it's good to hear that you're obviously already working on that.
And we have the facilities to do it. We've got classroom start. Yeah, we've got the facilities. We don't have to do that, so we can do that through these and classroom. This room here was a classroom set up last week, and you know, so we can do that. We've got the, as I said, the infrastructure in place to do it, and we've got the team to do it. We have a number of tour guides there. Some of them are ex-teachers, and some of them are, you know, have done training, but quite a few of them were extras in Game of Thrones as well. So they're really interested to actually talk about their experience being in the show. And there's other really unique skill sets of people that I've met people just in the last year and a half that are from here, but that most of their career they've been overseas, flying all over the world, but actually from here. And Game of Thrones gave them an opportunity to be home for 5 or 6 years, but they're actually some of the best in the world at what they do, makeup artists and stuff like that. So it's you want to get those stories out to say, you know, they're actually the best in the world. Some of the people that worked on the show, and they're from here. You know, so there's a lot of real life stories and that kind of role models that we can bring in as well. So.
That said, any assistance to nudge institutions our direction to engage would be very welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks again to you for hosting us today. Look forward to doing the tour, or certainly whatever we're doing. Hopefully we get plenty of time to do that, but thank you for that. Definitely, I think there's a particular issue around awareness of what you do here. You know, if I go to a particular country or to a place, I'm one of these people who likes to research and find out what's there to do, sometimes out of the normal things, and one of the ways you would do that's through TripAdvisor. When I go onto TripAdvisor for the Game of Thrones or for things to do in Northern Ireland, you know, the studio tour isn't up there. You know, obviously the usual suspects in terms of Titanic and that, but Dark Ages appears quite early on, and then when you go into that, I can see your problem with those tour operators, because again, I can buy a ticket to get on a bus run to do the Dark Ages and go on to Dunluce Castle and go on to Giant's Causeway. There doesn't seem to be a focus about getting people here to Banbridge. So I do think, and you've already said it, so I'm telling you, but it's definitely a big issue, and I suppose it's a greater issue for yourselves than Titanic. You know, I was at Titanic on Saturday actually, and it hasn't changed any, certainly since, you know, the 10 years ago that I was there last. But what they seem to be doing is almost packaging it up now, the SS Nomadic. They seem to have got better around some of the merchandise and stuff like that. So you spend, certainly I felt like I spent a lot more money. Maybe that's just it. Certainly maybe it's because I have children with me. But again, that's another factor. People, they almost seem to be bolstering that whole idea of merchandise, and so that could be strengthened as well. You're currently 100,000 per annum, is that right? In terms
Last
of
year was about 100,000. This year the target's 150.
150,
Yeah.
and within 3 years 400.
Yeah.
So I suppose just briefly, how do you? I take the issues around planning and parking, all of that needs to be sorted, and whatever support we can give, I'm happy to do that. But what else do you see has been a changing factor to allow you to, with, you know, it's quite an ambitious target.
Well, if you look at Titanic, for example, or Guinness Storehouse, or, you know, I've worked in plenty of other attractions around the world. You know, you might have 25-30% of your visitor number, and sometimes higher, will come from your tour operators. So these are the people who organise the buses, you know, and run the bus tours. We had, for example, last year 2,500 people from tour operators. Titanic will probably do that in a single day in July or August, just as an example, right? Yeah. And some of that comes from it. You don't just open. Back to Andy's point, when we first opened, some of those tour operators had a backlog of 2 years during COVID where they couldn't travel. So same as any of us who booked a holiday, the travel agent might say, well, keep your money here and we'll go when it opens up. So there was a bit of a backlog. That's passed now. And then but it's almost that. So we've done a lot of work in trying to build those relationships, and they are a little bit down the line. But that could grow from 2,500 last year to 10,000 this year to 25,000 next year. That channel will grow to become, you know, a third of the visitor number. And then there's other things. So some of these things are like education itself. You know, we could do 10, 15, 20,000 school groups, or you know, and there's other channels. So there's other channels that we've been working for the last 12 months or so to build, and they'll come to fruition. So a lot of those, you know, they'll rise. At the moment, like 85% of our visitor number comes through direct tickets, which is people who book through the website. So that's not even what you said about TripAdvisor or those other channels. That would be just our website, and so awareness grows, and all those channels will rise. So that's where it comes from.
It's probably a little bit also back to Jonathan's early point. Is whilst we're shouting, we're maybe not quite getting the traction and that level of subliminal support. Because if you see us all the time, even if it's not a specific campaign, but you see the picture of it, you see, and it's littered everywhere, and that assistance needs to come.
It does, and there's no doubt the brand of
to help us.
Yeah, and the success of Game of Thrones is self-evident. So there's no question about that. It's just about how do you influence, and we talk about influencers, you know, get people to come here and to spend their money. I suppose just a final question from me, because I'm conscious obviously there's others. In terms of the pricing of you know, obviously you mentioned about the car parking. Like, I think it's scandalous, what, 500,000 per annum, that would have a significant impact, no doubt, on the pricing. Is pricing, obviously, look, enthusiasts will, you know, what do you put, you know, people will pay to come to see these things, but, you know, is that something which is a factor, do you think, for people? Are they saying it's, like, I know certainly for me, going with a family of 4, I think it was about £60 to go to the Titanic. You know, for here, I think it's the tickets were £29 to £30 per person as well.
It's an interesting one, and all like everything, all these things are slightly connected. Whilst we can't get people directly to site, we're already suffering £11 a head just to
Yes.
get people from there to here. But part of our strategy this year is, with this is why the car park is so critical for our local, our local audience, both north and south of the border, is because what we can then do is we can actually engage with our local audience and say, locals, £10 ticket. We have the ability to do that. We know we have the finances, and this is about driving footfall through the door, because we do have a very healthy secondary spend when people get here. So ticket price, we actually want to try and drive our average ticket price down, but it's very difficult to do that with the infrastructure that we currently have. So if we can change that infrastructure, then what we would be doing is, I would suggest, and I'm not talking out of turn, I would be, speaking to Sam about releasing maybe 50,000 £10 tickets this year and things. But whenever you're looking at £11.97 to get people from the boulevard to here, it's very hard to drive that down. But we have the tools to do it, but what we don't have yet is the infrastructure to allow us to do it.
We reduced it from, I think it's February last year, we reduced it from $39.50, which was definitely too high. We were £10 more expensive than anyone else, so that was changed last year fairly quickly. But the reality was we discounted 25% a lot of the year anyway, so it got down to the 29%, so we moved it there. But funnily enough, at that point it was exactly the same as Guinness Storehouse and Titanic, and then in the last 6 months they've reduced theirs by about, so Guinness Storehouse is €30, Titanic's $24.95. I think what you did was probably a family bundle, do it as a bundle. So we do benchmark regularly. I mean, we do pay a royalty, not this, it's our problem, not anyone else's, the end consumer, but you have to just look at the price. But we have an average ticket price. Titanic will run on an average ticket price of about £15 with all the discounts that come through. So we would be in the region of about £20. But and as I said, we're strategically trying to bring that down so there's more offers available to people. So so we're conscious of it and we keep close eye on it.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, colleague, I'm going to ask the rest of you to save your questions for the tour. Just we have other business to get through, and then to do the tour, and then be in Portadown for 2 o'clock. So we can, including mine, we can ask my questions while we're on the tour.
We'll be walking with you.
Perfect. Thank you. That's great. Okay, item 8, members delegated legislation, the employment's rights order, and I refer members to the clerk's cover note at page 243. The department has laid a statutory rule entitled SR 2025-63, the Employment Rights Increase to Limits Order Northern Ireland 2025. The rule is not subject to any procedure in the Assembly and will come into operation on the 6th of April. The rule revises the limit on awards and payments under certain employment rights legislation in line with RPI. The committee considered the rule on the 19th of March and had no concerns. Are there any questions on this, members? If not, could I put that the Committee for the Economy has considered the statutory rule SR 2025-63, the Employment Rights Increase of Limits Order Northern Ireland 2025, and subject to the report of the ESR, has no objection to the rule. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 9, members, then is correspondence. Are members content to dispose of those as advised in the table?
Yeah.
Agreed. Thank you. Forward work plan, Peter.
Thanks, Chairperson. A couple of just quick ones. Right, the committee had previously indicated that it might want to attend the Balmoral show, and to give some ideas about that, the engagement team could come and speak to us next week. Do you still want to go to the Balmoral show?
So I only have a concern that I don't know whether it would be trying to get everyone there, get in, and then keep people there for the committee may be difficult, but I'm happy to take other people's views on this.
Most people not there for party stands anyway. Or
I believe it would be a good idea. I know other committees that have met at it and it's been as successful as in it's normally coordinated by the Assembly in terms of everything in the same environment. I think there's a good advantage of being there, personally.
Chair, what were we proposing to do at the Balmoral show? Is that I suppose is the issue? So if we're not having a meeting, like, what's the point really? Like,
Well, engagement would come to us next week and suggest a few things. So it could be a Q&A session, or it could be like a round table event with stakeholders.
I think. Sorry, Chair. Just anything too formalised at the Balmoral show, I don't believe works. But there's a huge business space, agri-food in particular, that'll all be present and keen to engage. They'll not only be engaging with the Agriculture Committee but us. Is there the potential that the meeting would be joint with our agriculture colleagues and we could have organisations such as the agri-food business going to be there, experience some of the challenges or what the industry's bringing forward in terms of their plans going forward? That might be better for everybody.
Right, there's a lot of advanced manufacturing as well,
Yeah.
you know.
There's good opportunity there.
So this would be, that would be an additional meeting then, because it would be on a Thursday. I think the plan was that we would have our normal meeting on the Wednesday, the 14th.
Well, I don't want to add added burden. I thought maybe you could do the two jointly, which would have saved a meeting in a sense. But
Well,
if
let's
that
see
can't be-
what engagements say next week, and then we can make a final decision based on that. Members can
Yeah, if that can't be accommodated. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Other bits then are the investment zone, so the enhanced investment zone, the department has agreed to come and brief on that on the 21st of May.
Yep.
The Association for Project Safety have asked to meet informally with the chairperson. If members are content, they'll do that on the 27th of May, if that is agreed, chairperson.
Great.
Is that agreed, members?
28th, yeah.
It would just be the chairperson, the 27th.
Oh, right, 27th, yeah, yeah. Great.
Okay, and then additionally, I'm looking forward to the forward work programme. We're just about into Easter recess, summer recess, not that far away. My plan would be, if members are agreeable, to come back on the 3rd of September. What we do is we do the correspondence. We'd have a little bit of a review of our strategic plan, because hopefully we'd have more clarity then from the department on legislation and such like. And then maybe we could top that off a very short meeting with a little visit to Sony, which we tried to do last year and failed. And Sony are very keen to get you back again. So if that, have a think about that, members, and see if that would work for you. So we would be we'd be back ahead of every other committee in the assembly, but we'd get all our correspondence done.
I'm going to say it's my mum's 70, so I know I'll not be there. But
Well, that's important.
yes. So, but I have no objections. So. The rest of you can tear on. I'll be partying.
That's still Reese. Is
Could we
that
not let you know?
From the party.
Yes, exactly.
Strictly speaking, recess finishes the previous Friday.
Okay.
I think the business committee are meeting on the Tuesday before that, so we'll be meeting on the Wednesday if members are agreeable with that. And then the other thing is Belfast Stories, as was mentioned earlier. They've indicated to us there might be something to say about that on the 24th of September, so that might be the date to go there, or at least hear about it. So members are content with the forward work programme as
Agreed. Okay. Any other business, members? If not, then our next meeting will be next Wednesday at 10 a.m. at Parliament Buildings. Thank you very much.